The announcement did not begin with a dramatic flourish. It began with a pause. Donald Trump stood behind the familiar podium, hands resting wide apart, fingers splayed as if bracing himself against an invisible current. The room was packed. Reporters shoulder to shoulder, camera operators adjusting lenses, aides lining the walls with practiced neutrality. The air carried that particular tension that always preceded one of his statements, a mixture of anticipation and unease. People had been tipped off that something big was coming, but no one had expected what followed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly, and began to speak about borders, about fairness, about how the United States had been taken for granted for decades. The words at first sounded familiar, almost routine. Then he said it. A ban. A temporary suspension. Visas. Europeans. For a split second, the room seemed not to understand the sentence. Sound itself appeared to hesitate. Then, the realization hit, rippling outward like a shockwave. Pens froze mid-scribble. A correspondent from Paris mouthed a quiet, "What?" under her breath. Someone near the back let out a short, involuntary laugh, thinking it had to be a misstatement. Trump continued, voice steady, repeating the policy in clearer, sharper terms. European nationals, he said, would no longer be eligible for new visas until further notice. Exceptions would be very limited. The reasons were framed as security reviews, economic balance, and leverage in negotiations that, according to him, had stalled for too long. Within seconds, phones buzzed across the room. News alerts began firing before the press conference had even ended. Live captions struggled to keep up. Trump spoke about strength, about sovereignty, about how America needed to send a message. He dismissed concerns preemptively, saying Europe would come to the table fast once they realized the seriousness of the move. When a reporter shouted a question about allies and decades-long partnerships, he waved it off, saying alliances only worked when both sides respected each other equally. As the briefing ended and aides moved in to usher him away, the noise exploded. Reporters shouted questions that went unanswered. Camera lights dimmed and then flared again as analysts rushed to record instant reactions. Outside the room, producers barked orders into headsets, demanding confirmations, clarifications, reactions from embassies. The story was already breaking, multiplying, fragmenting into 1,000 angles at once. Across the Atlantic, it was early afternoon in much of Europe. In a glass-walled office tower in Frankfurt, a financial analyst glanced at her phone during a meeting and felt her stomach drop. The headline seemed unreal, like a parody account or a mistranslation. She refreshed the page. Then again. The same words stared back at her. Trump bans Europeans from getting visas. Her colleagues began murmuring as similar notifications appeared on their screens. The meeting dissolved into confusion, charts forgotten, projections abandoned. At Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, the impact was immediate and visceral. A young couple stood in line at a check-in counter, passports in hand, bound for New York for what was supposed to be a long-planned honeymoon. The airline agent's smile faltered as she received an update on her terminal screen. She asked them to wait. Minutes stretched. Finally, she explained apologetically that flights were being reviewed and boarding could not proceed as planned. Around them, voices rose in multiple languages, French, Italian, Spanish, German, each carrying the same mixture of disbelief and anger. In London, a postgraduate student sitting in a cafe near King's Cross reread the alert over and over. He had been accepted into a research program at an American university, his visa interview scheduled for the following week. Years of preparation suddenly felt fragile, as if they could crumble with a single bureaucratic decision. He opened his email, half expecting a message from the university already waiting. Nothing yet, just silence, heavier than any rejection. Government buildings across Europe shifted instantly into crisis mode. In Brussels, officials at the European Commission convened emergency calls, aides rushing down corridors with folders and tablets. Screens lit up with live feeds from Washington, analysts replaying Trump's words again and again, parsing every phrase for loopholes or timelines. Was it truly immediate? Was it reversible? Was it a bluff? No one knew, and that uncertainty was the most destabilizing element of all. Back in the United States, the reaction was just as swift but far more divided. In New York, a crowd gathered outside a major network studio, some cheering, some shouting in protest. Commentators filled airtime with heated debate. Supporters framed the ban as a bold correction, arguing that Europe had enjoyed open access while imposing restrictions of its own. Critics warned of economic fallout, diplomatic isolation, and a rupture in relationships that had defined the post-war world. Inside a quiet townhouse in Washington, a career diplomat sat alone, staring at the wall. He had spent 3 decades working with European counterparts, building trust through crises, treaties, and late-night negotiations. He knew the phone would start ringing soon. Old contacts, friends even, demanding explanations he did not have. For the first time in his career, he felt a sharp sense of professional helplessness. The markets reacted before politicians could. Currency values flickered, travel stocks dipped, and analysts began revising forecasts in real time. Airlines issued carefully worded statements acknowledging regulatory uncertainty.
Law firms published rapid briefings for clients whose workforces suddenly spanned a newly erected barrier. Tech companies with transatlantic teams scrambled to assess how many employees might be affected, how many projects delayed or canceled altogether. Social media turned into a chaotic mosaic of emotion. Hashtags trended within minutes. Some users celebrated, posting flags and slogans about national pride. Others shared photos of past trips, study abroad experiences, weddings, friendships forged across oceans, now framed as evidence of what might be lost. Memes mixed with genuine fear. Misinformation spread alongside official statements, further muddying an already turbulent situation. In Rome, an elderly man watched the evening news with a furrowed brow. He remembered the stories his parents told him about post-war reconstruction, about America as a distant but vital partner. To him, the ban felt not just political but personal, as if a door he had always assumed would remain open had been slammed shut without warning. Inside the White House, aides moved quickly but tensely. Some had anticipated backlash, few had anticipated the sheer scale of it. Draft statements were written and rewritten. Calls were scheduled with select European leaders, though no one was sure how receptive they would be. Trump himself, according to those nearby, appeared satisfied, convinced that the pressure would force rapid concessions. To him, the chaos was leverage. As night fell over Washington, Europe was already deep in evening. Emergency press conferences lit up capitals from Madrid to Stockholm. Leaders stood before flags and microphones, choosing words carefully, condemning the move while leaving room for dialogue. No one wanted to be seen as weak, but no one wanted escalation either. The phrase unprecedented echoed again and again. At an airport hotel in Amsterdam, a conference attendee sat on his bed surrounded by half-packed luggage. His flight to Chicago was scheduled for the morning, but rumors suggested all departures were being reviewed. He considered calling his family, then decided against it, not wanting to alarm them without facts. Instead, he stared out the window at the runway lights, each one a reminder of movement now suddenly uncertain. By the time the first full day ended, the world felt subtly altered, not because borders had physically changed, but because assumptions had. The ease with which people had moved, planned, imagined futures across the Atlantic had been replaced by doubt.
Scene 1 of the crisis closed not with resolution, but with a shared global intake of breath, a sense that something fundamental had shifted, and that whatever came next would be shaped by the shock of this single announcement.